In this video, I want to talk about the CSS box model. You can think of each HTML element as a box. These CSS boxes, it consists of margins, borders, padding, and the actual content itself. Here's a pretty good illustration of that. Let's see, the content right here is the content. That would be the text or images that you have in your HTML document. The padding, that's the space between the content and the edge of your HTML element. The border, that's what goes around the padding and the content. And then margin, that's considered outside of your border, padding, and content. To illustrate this, let's look at our lab2 file. This lab2 file has several block level elements. For example, we have this container right here, the header, that takes up the entire width. Here's a H1 heading that takes up the entire width. And then here's a paragraph that takes up the entire width. So even though there's room for other elements to be beside it, that's just not what block level elements do. They take up the entire width. And we can't see that with all these other elements, but as I mentioned with the CSS box model, all HTML elements can be considered as boxes. So really, you can kind of imagine invisible boxes around each one of these elements. You can further visualize the CSS box model by looking at the inspect element. So I'm in Chrome right now, so I can do this by right-clicking and then clicking on inspect. And it shows me right here the border or the box model for this H1 element. It is, the content itself is 500.5 pixels by 74 pixels tall. That would be this outline section. There is no padding or margin because, as you recall, in the style sheet with the all selector, we set everything to have a margin of 0 and a padding of 0. However, there is a border that's 2 pixels wide. And that's because we applied the ID main title, and in the border property we said to make it 2 pixels. So that's what we're seeing there. Now what about the header right here? Well, it's 1001 by 240 pixels. It doesn't have a padding, it doesn't have a border, and it doesn't have a margin. Let's add something to all paragraphs. Let's add a CSS rule for all the paragraphs in this lab2 file. Let's say that we want to add a background color of bold. Let's refresh our preview. And that's what we get. Each paragraph or P element in this lab2 file now has a background color of gold. And this makes your box model more visible by doing that. You can see that this paragraph, that is indeed a box. Here's another paragraph, there's another paragraph, there's another paragraph, and so on. Right now, there's not any kind of padding or margin or any kind of border. So let's add a margin to that. Or actually, let's start with padding. For the padding, let's add 25 pixels. Refresh, and that's what we get here. Between the content itself and the edge of the element, we added a 25 pixel padding all around. So with one value, it added a padding to the top, right, bottom, and left sides of this HTML element. Now let's add a border. Add a 2 pixel border, solid, and dark green. Refresh, and that's what we get here. It's kind of hard to see maybe, but each paragraph now has a 2 pixel wide border all around with the color of dark green. Finally, let's add a margin. Let's add a 25 pixel margin. So save, refresh, and now we've added a margin all around. The margin is going to be the area outside of the border, so that's going to be outside of the border, padding, and content really. And that's what we're seeing here. There's 25 pixels all around. Just like padding, it added 25 pixels to the top, right, bottom, and left sides. When it comes to padding, borders, and margins, we can individually create different styling for each side. For example, with this margin property, I could add 4 values to that. The first value would be for the top. So say I want to make that 0. Then the next one, you're going to go clockwise. So the next one would be the right side, then the bottom, and finally the left side. Save that. And that's what we get here. 0 at the top, 25 on the right, 25 at the bottom, and then 0 on the left. So you can do the same thing for border, or excuse me, you can do the same thing for padding. You could also do something like this. Padding dash top, let's make that 100 pixels. Now we've added 100 pixels while the rest stayed 25 pixels. So you can do the same thing with margin top. You can do the same thing with margin left, margin right, and margin bottom.